Welcome to the Falling Walls plenary table. How to restart science in Ukraine after the Russian aggression.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Georg Schütte. I'm Secretary General of the Volkswagen Foundation, and I'm extremely happy that you are here. A war is raging in Europe. When we met last year in November, almost none of us would have foreseen that Russia would invade Ukraine. The minute we meet here, people die in Ukraine. So I'm extremely happy that you took the time at 9 o'clock this morning to discuss with us the situation of science and research in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. You might imagine that it is quite difficult to bring in people from this country which is war-torn. We are extremely happy that we were able to bring together a panel of representatives of the Ukrainian, the Polish, and the German science and research system to discuss with us the situation of science and research in Ukraine, in this war-torn country, and to take a look at what comes next. And what the next will be, we also have to discuss during the 50 minutes that are ahead of us. So I take a seat. Change the microphones, and I welcome the participants and discussants at this table. And this is Oleksiy Kolezhuk, the corresponding member of the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine, chairman of the Scientific Committee of the National Council of Ukraine for Scientific and Technological Development. Oleksiy, please have a seat. With us is also Liubov Poshyvailo-Strube. Like Oleksiy, a physicist, a climate researcher who got her training, amongst others, in Wuppertal, in Jülich, and at Harvard University. And amongst others, she coordinates the volunteer team of the Ukrainian Global University. Paweł Rowiński is a mathematician and a physicist as well. He's the vice president of the Polish Academy of Sciences and member of ALEA, the Union of European Academies of Sciences. Then with us is Julia von Blumenthal, the new president of Humboldt University in Berlin and the former president of the University of Frankfurt-Oder. And last but not least, Heide Ahrens is with us, the CEO, the Secretary General of the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, the German Research Council, the most important funder of basic research, non-public funder of basic research at German universities. So give us a hand of applause for those who are here. First of all, this morning, we decided to take a look at the situation of science and research in Ukraine. None of us here at this table lives in Ukraine right now. Oleksiy is based in Mainz as a Philipp Schwarz Fellow. The Philipp Schwarz Initiative is an initiative of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, funded by, amongst others, the German Foreign Office, to support researchers who have to leave their home country and flee and find refuge and a safe haven someplace else. In your case, it's Mainz. And Liubov is based in Jülich, in Germany, close to Aachen. And so I would like to ask the two of you first about what you hear from your colleagues in Ukraine, how they survive in a war situation. So, Oleksiy, please give us an impression of what science and research under conditions of a terrible war, what it is like, please.
Thank you. Well, as you may imagine, the war had a huge impact on the entire Ukrainian society and on the researchers as well. And it's not only about destroyed research infrastructure and casualties, although that is also the case, but primarily I would say the impact is the scientific system of Ukraine stopped being productive this year. Yeah, because people are traumatized, people have limited opportunities of being useful, of continuing their research, because even if you are alive, you are displaced, then usually, except for very few cases, if you're a theoretician and you're working on some mathematical problem, then you cannot reasonably continue your research. So not experimental scientists, not biologists, not medicine, and so on. So there is a huge disruption in the normal course of events. And then, of course, during the wartime, there are huge budget cuts. So many research programs are being stopped, completely cut or cut partly. So there are job cuts and so on and so on. So I would say the main impact up to now, despite a huge impact on the research infrastructure, but I would still say that the main impact now is on the human capital, on the researchers themselves. So science is researchers. And those researchers are now at risk because then they are now put in the situation where they are, so to say, pressed to whether they want to stay in science, whether they want to stay researchers. And that's the main point where I think something can be done and that can be helped. Because we can help people be useful, be productive, be researchers, if we give them some means to live and some reasonable network to apply, to realize themselves as researchers. So I think those are obvious things which should be funded, which should be helped now. So restoring the infrastructure is important, but that's probably not the matter of urgency now, because the war is not over. It's very difficult to predict the course of the war, and of course now no one will start big rebuilds of the neutron source, which was destroyed, for example. Yeah, but installing network, installing some seeds for the future centers of excellence in Ukraine, which will then contribute also in the long term to the transformation of our research system, which is a separate story of the state of our research system even before the war. So it direly needs transformation, and now it's the opportunity to achieve it. And we can put those seeds, those research networks, those seeds for centers of excellence to ensure that this transformation will go to the right direction afterwards.
Let's stick for a little while with the present situation. For me personally, my mental map of Europe has changed, and Ukraine has become part of this mental map. A war is raging, as I said in the beginning, which is only a couple of 100 kilometers away, and yet we cannot perceive what it is like to work as a scientist under war conditions. So very simple questions like, are salaries being paid? Do people go to the laboratory, to the university every morning? How has the situation changed? Give us a view on what you hear.
It's very different in different places. So for example, at the university where I work, the salaries were cut a bit, so just 25%. In other institutions, so in some institutions of the Academy of Sciences, the salaries were cut like 40 or 50%. So people just say they're working part-time. At some places, it's especially now when there are big cuts of electricity, it's nearly impossible to work at all. Yeah, so you still continue to get your salary, but the point is you cannot continue working. Yeah, if there is no electricity or it's unpredictable, so you can imagine running an experiment in the conditions where the electricity can be cut any moment is impossible. So the situation is very inhomogeneous across Ukraine, but certainly, the salaries were not great even before the war. So irrespective of how large are the cuts, it's now a very pressing situation for many people. And people are already, people I know are already trying to find additional sources of income and basically starting doing something else So a lot of researchers can do IT, for example, and IT brings a lot more money. And so you can earn something doing IT, and usually from my own experience, so when people start doing IT, then after 2 or 3 years, they are doing just IT. And that's internal brain drain, which we are risking now. Yeah, if the best researchers will go to IT, okay, good for IT, bad for science.
Well, thank you. Liubov, earlier this year, I participated in a meeting in Bucharest at the New Europe College, and there were people of your generation from Ukraine, from Russia, who told me that they do not know what their identity is. Some of them were born in Russia, then educated in Ukraine, started their career. Others started in Ukraine, moved to Russia. Eventually, many of them ended up in Western Europe, and their sense of belonging was somewhat flawed. Now, you come from Ukraine, you live in Jülich, West Germany now. What's your sense of identity, and what do you hear from your colleagues back home?
Yeah, thank you for this question. For me, my identity, I'm a Ukrainian. I was born in an independent Ukraine, so I'm this generation that has basically nothing to do with Russia. So I'm very far from that. And living in Germany for some years, I definitely identify myself as Ukrainian. It has also the way how I grew up. It depends on your family. What values were put on you when you were there in Russia or in Ukraine or in Germany, it doesn't matter where you were. So to me, I identify definitely myself as a Ukrainian, and I think now is the time when many people ask this question to themselves. It's important to answer, but luckily for me, that was not a question. It was always answered.
What do you hear from your fellow colleagues at research institutes, universities in Ukraine? Are they still there? Do they go to other places? Are they able to go to other places? Do they need to participate in the war as soldiers? What is the situation like?
Yeah, some students, they really do participate in the war, so they basically drop their studies, and they decided that that is more important now. They felt like they want to do it, right? Many of people, they had to flee abroad to have the safer working or studying conditions, but it's very encouraging to see that many of them, they want to come back to Ukraine, to rebuild Ukraine after the war, or to build the new Ukraine, which will be, it will be something new that have never happened before. And at the beginning of the war, there were many new initiatives in Ukraine and abroad that they started to support science. And one of the initiatives which I'm also participating in and supporting Ukrainians, it's called Ukrainian Global University, abbreviated UGU initiative. So this initiative was launched by the Kyiv School of Economics together with partners in government and educational institutions and civil organizations. This started just at the first weeks of the war. And the idea of this initiative is to identify talented students, teachers, scientists in Ukraine, give them the opportunity, the new opportunities to education, to research, and then foster their further career in Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine. So this initiative helps also to prevent brain drain and supports talents in Ukraine. And the goal of this initiative is also to preserve and to multiply the human capital, which will be really needed now already, but even more after the war to rebuild the country. So it's a pleasure to see that many young Ukrainians, they have this will to work for the country and for the future development and for the development of the research in Ukraine. But at this time, as was said before, there is a need, the large need of the support from the international communities and donors, and mainly not for Ukrainians, not only for Ukrainians who are abroad, but also for Ukrainian people that are now in Ukraine. And in this time of the war, they still want to do their science there. So it should be found some solutions how to support Ukrainians that are there. They cannot leave the country in one or the other way, or they just don't want, because they want to stay there and to work for their country.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but first I would like to turn to Paweł Rowiński. Poland has taken upon its shoulders a large burden to take in people who flee from Ukraine, and the Polish Academy was quite active in providing support. Give us a view from a neighboring country, and I should say a neighboring country to both Ukraine and to Germany. Your country is at the forefront of support. How do you perceive the situation from Warsaw and from Poland?
Yes, this situation has been changing over time very much. So right now we feel smarter and somehow adjusted, if you can adjust to the war at all. But you can imagine the beginning of the war, a lot of people knocking to our doors, just help us. And we were helpless at the very beginning because we didn't have a program how to do it. I represent Polish Academy of Sciences, and we were in a good position because we had very good links with Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, so we were in touch with the president of the academy. We knew what was going on. And at the very beginning, we decided we need to act, so we established a scholarship program which was very much to help the first ones that came to Poland. So on the 1st of March, a few days after the war started, we had already a signed agreement with the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences and started the scholarship program. And you can imagine that this program was over after 5 days. So the money that we had was enough for 5 days, but it meant that we had a lot of scholars already at the institutes of the Polish Academy of Sciences. So then, fortunately, we had good contacts with other institutions all over the world. So the first was US Academy of Sciences that decided to help us as well. And then a number of other institutions like Leopoldina from Germany, Royal Society. We decided to establish new programs, and we were ready to have first scholarship program. After this first wave, we had another one. So at the moment we have, at the institutes of the Polish Academy of Sciences, we have some 230 scholars. But these are short-term help. We think about developing this program to help researchers in Ukraine. And that's something that we need to do, not only to have them in Poland and in other countries, but we need to think about the program to how to help them in Ukraine, because so far we could help only researchers who are women. Men couldn't come to Poland, and very often the families were separated. We deal with situations that husband is in Ukraine, wife is in Poland or in Germany or in other countries, so that's a really tricky and difficult situation. But the key point was to be quick, because they needed this help very quickly.
Congratulations. I know, and three of my colleagues are here, who started a program of the Volkswagen Foundation to support refugee researchers. We did it within 4 weeks, and we thought we were quick. You did it in 7 days, so congratulations and thank you. Julia von Blumenthal, when the war broke out, you were president of the university in Frankfurt-Oder, which is at the German-Polish border, so probably the far eastern, one of the universities in the east of Germany that provided an entry door from Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe to Germany. How did you perceive the situation also from a student's and university perspective at that time and ever since?
It was an immediate shock, although for us, our map didn't change, because we had Ukraine on the map for more than 8 years. European University Viadrina started to focus on Ukraine in 2014, and since then has developed research and also strong personal ties. So what I did first was to call an informal meeting of all our Ukrainian students and staff. So I sent an email to more than 150 people, and it was just like showing we are here, we want to hear what's your situation, and we want to show you that we stand by your side. And this was just the first step. Of course, then we tried to take in as many students as possible with a university with a profile only in social and science and humanities. Of course, we couldn't take in all of them because they're working for other expertise, other study programs, and we also try to integrate as many scholars into our existing research. And I think when we now talk about the next step, this is really what's important. The immediate help is still going on. It's still going on for people who decide now to leave Kiev or to leave other cities in Ukraine. But the second step is to integrate our Ukrainian colleagues into our existing research and to make them part of our international academic community. And the Ukrainian Global University we were talked about, I think, is one very important example. It's also focused on the social sciences, and I think we need more of these examples that work together with our Ukrainian partners, make them part of the international research community, try to integrate both researchers that are still in Ukraine and researchers that have flown from Ukraine to prevent the brain drain, and also to make, as I said, part of our academic network. And then there is also a third point, which especially refers to us here in Germany, is that, as you said, our perception of Europe changed. It's our duty to make sure that this perception doesn't change again, so that we go on conducting profound research on Central and Eastern Europe, on Ukraine, that we listen more to the existing knowledge that has been there before February the 24th. And I think this is really something we have to do here in Germany to support the institutions who have the expertise, who have supported this Ukrainian studies for a long time, to enable them to strengthen the expertise, although we all know that this is not a field where we can attract many students. So it's something that goes against some of the logics of funding we have in our German university system. But still, it's a very important task. So for me, it's the urgent help still goes on. It's integrating our Ukrainian colleagues and partners into our academic community. And the third is strengthen our expertise on Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And the last take on the situation between February and today is from Heide Ahrens from Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. Heide, what did the German research system, the German organizations representing the German research system, how did they react? What's your take on that?
Yes, so the German Research Foundation is currently also the speaker of the Alliance of Science Organizations in Germany, and immediately on February 25th, the Alliance decided to express its solidarity with the Ukraine and discuss how they could react on the situation. And we have long-standing cooperation with Ukraine, so it's really our predecessor organization had a cooperation with Ukraine, and we all decided to suspend the cooperation with Russia. And that was a very exceptional case that we suspended and froze the cooperation with Russia. And on the other hand, we had contacts on the working level with the Ukrainian partners. And I think luckily we had several measurements in place, like fellowships. We heard about Philip Schwartz initiative, but also we grant additional funds from scientists that come to projects that are already funded from principal investigators in Germany as a research foundation. And only in December we had decided to open up the Walter Benjamin Fellowship for young state researchers that might flee from the country. But then what we heard, it's important that we have also funding for Ukrainians at home. And we only recently opened up our funding so that we can give grants for cooperating partners in the Ukraine. So up to €1,000 per month for each researcher may be granted to these partners. And we are thinking about cooperation with National Research Foundation of Ukraine. That might be that we also take over the part of the matching fund. Usually we give the fund for German partners and the partner abroad gives their fund. But in the current situation, it might be a possibility to open this fund here. And I think it's important with regard to infrastructure and integration to think about new ways of also letting the participate in open access, for example. So find new ways to find next steps until the war ends, hopefully.
Well, thank you very much. And as you can hear, as tragic as the situation is, around this table here, there are already many ideas about what to do in the future, just like Heide and Julia said at the very end in their statements. Paweł, you said earlier on when we discussed it internally that there are already plans being developed by national academies of sciences, amongst others, a plan of the Polish and the US National Academy of Sciences, a 10-point plan. Again, then there are ideas that derive from G7 meetings. There are others that were developed in Switzerland. Give us a view on the outlook, on ideas about what to do next, please.
Yeah, this is something that we have to take lessons from. So this initial help was something that was not well organized, we have to admit. So at the very beginning, we established some scholarships programs, but also something that we sometimes don't stress very much on. For example, Polish institutions took over servers of the institutes of the Ukraine. There's some immediate help that without huge engagement of finances, you could do things. But we learned that there are things that should be done in the future. And first of all, that they shouldn't be done without Ukrainians, so without their influence on the decisions. So first of all, we decided that we need to have in the loop the leaders of Ukrainian research to make decisions together with them. So that was the first point. Another point was that you mentioned, that we should somehow counteract the brain draining, because we need to think about the future, and we should develop programs to help Ukrainians not only to come to our countries, but to help them in Ukraine. So we decided to build scholarship programs for just short terms, having good Ukrainian researchers in our countries. We should link them with the best institutions in the world that they can learn at the moment, but they should have a program that will make them coming back to Ukraine and to rebuild or build this research groups in Ukraine. So we are, for example, now at the final stage of organizing scholarship programs that we will finance research groups, not just individual scientists. And these research groups will be working in our countries here in Western Europe, but also at the same time in Ukraine. So it's of course very tricky and difficult, because when the institution is under the war situation, very often signature of agreement and also how to follow the progress of this program. It's not the same situation as under normal circumstances. So usually our foundations are not adjusted to it. But of course there are a lot of, and this 10-point action plan that has been signed by US National Academy of Sciences, Polish Academy of Sciences, but also the network of all the academies of Europe, ALEA, which I am also a member of the board. And it was also Royal Society, Leopoldina, Danish Academy of Sciences, that also put some funds on the table, which is very important. And we signed what is called 10-point action plan. It was also published by journal Science. And there are a number of things, but one I already mentioned, that nothing can be done without Ukrainians, but there are also a lot of things like, for example, open access for researchers in Ukraine that we very often don't think about, and access to all the journals that they cannot afford to pay now for this access. This is very expensive. So this is everything what is put in this plan. And what is most important, that it is to support researchers and the infrastructure as well within the Ukrainian territory, not only having these researchers outside the country.
Thank you very much. And Liubov, you started already to talk about the global university. Give us an insight about the plans, the future plans of the Ukrainian Global University. You said it was targeting people who continue to work in Ukraine, and it's not only researchers, it's probably also about students, if the term university is the right connotation, please.
Yeah, so this is an initiative that was launched by the Kyiv School of Economics, and it gathered many other institutions. Since the beginning of the war, there were around 60 international institutions that supported this initiative, and they signed the memorandums of understanding with the UGU initiative. So they proposed different ways of supporting students Ukrainian students. So at the same time, this initiative also gathered a large number of volunteers from around 30 countries worldwide. From the beginning of this initiative, there were around 2,700 Ukrainian applicants who applied for this initiative. Then they went through the selection process of the UGU initiative, and then later the successful students, they were merged with the options that the partner institutions proposed for the Ukrainian students. And some of them, they were already, or they are already now abroad, and they started their education abroad this academic year. And their goal of these students who went abroad to come back after their study to Ukraine and to rebuild Ukraine. So further also the focus...
2,700 applicants, and how many people are being funded right now?
Around 60 people.
60?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. Please continue.
No, I just wanted to add that at the first loop of this initiative, the main focus was for the students, but further it will be also broadened to the researchers. And the plan is also to work on creating some joint programs together with international community and donors, and together with Ukrainian institutions, to create the joint programs to support researchers that are in Ukraine through the internships for Ukrainians in Ukraine, but funded by the donors, and also to create non-residential research fellowships, for Ukrainian students. So that's the further goal, of the initiative.
I think what is important to realize is that Ukrainian Global University doesn't have own funds, of course, but they have to get the funds from the partner universities. So at European University Viadrina, we also offered some places for the students, and we were very lucky that our system here is that students can apply for the general funding for students, or the BAföG. And also the program by the BMBF, our national ministry, Ukraine Digital, which allows for teaching that links Ukrainian universities with German universities, is very helpful, because this enables, helps to realize the idea of this university to get students to a safer place, but still have them hold the contact to their home institution. So this is how you can see how our national funding ties into the initiatives that come from Ukraine. And we have similar examples like this global network from individual universities like the Kyiv Mohila Academy, who send want to establish like liaison offices in their main partner institutions, and also with the idea of having the opportunity to send students from Kyiv Mohila Academy for a semester or a year abroad, and then give them the opportunity to come back. And also, in an ideal world, they would be able then maybe in the end get a degree from their home institution in Ukraine and also from a other European or global university. So there's many different kinds of all this way of in working together in a partnership, I think, which is very, very important at the moment.
Oleksiy, do you have any recommendations, since we start to brainstorm about opportunities and ways how to help? What's your take on this from a Ukrainian perspective? What do we need to do in order to coordinate these activities?
Well, since you said the word coordinate, then I would comment on the fact that we need some coordination center, because obviously we have heard there is a lot of very nice initiatives, but at the moment it's more like community efforts which are more or less disentangled. And since there is a general trend of organizing sort of, so people speak about the Marshall's Plan and so on, so I think this sort of scale of effort needs the respective scale of coordination. Right? So because people have to know like the single place where they can get all the information, and they can get the information about the opportunities, about what is possible, what is not, and so on. And I think it's time to start about thinking about this coordination center. That's one point. And second, if we speak about specific efforts which should be supported, should be funded, that what comes to my mind is doctoral schools. Joint doctoral schools, because that's very important. Imagine students who are now in Ukraine in their master studies, so they're approaching the university diploma, and then they're starting about thinking what to do next. The possibilities are very limited. Yeah, especially so if you're not a mathematician, for example, if it's not a completely theory work with paper and pencil and the computer, maybe then the possibilities are very limited. And I think establishing joint doctoral networks is very important to give this young generation, which is now coming, so that we have this backup, that we have this next generation of scientists, yeah? Because otherwise we are risking to lose them. And I think this can be done with relatively little investment. And it's important to concentrate on people who are in Ukraine, because we have also a lot of those initiatives which involve like bringing students to Germany, for example, for some practicum and so on. But currently it's very tricky to organize legally, because there are still travel restrictions in place, and each case has to be negotiated separately at the level of the top government level, which is simply impossible if we want to scale up this effort. You can do that with small groups of 10, 20 people, but if you're speaking about hundreds, then something has to be done in that direction.
Thank you very much. Just a second, before we continue, and it's Paweł and Heide who want to make a brief remark. Please, ladies and gentlemen, get ready. Adam is collecting questions already, and he's eager to chip them in. But first, 30 seconds to Paweł and to Heide. Paweł.
Yeah, just very shortly, you mentioned something what is being talked about, I mean Marshall Plan. We need to somehow convince politicians that you cannot rebuild the country just by building roads and hospitals, etc. That we need to convince that research is one of the front things to be rebuilt, because the country will not exist without good science. And this is something that we need to take into account, that there must be huge funds put on I wouldn't say rebuilding research in Ukraine, building a new one in a new kind of a fashion. So that's something that we really need to do, to convince politicians that it is one of the priorities. And I think it is one of the major threats that other things will be rebuilt and research will be forgotten.
Very important. Thank you. Heide.
Yes, yes, I would like to come back to the idea of a coordination, and the suggestion of the GFG is that we have sort of conference to coordinate all the efforts and have a sort of labor division between the partners. And for example, the German Research Foundation is very experienced in coordinated research structures, so we could talk about international research training groups, as you mentioned, and further in the future also about collaborative research centers that we might talk about. And I also would like to bring in the perspectives that we have to think about the EU level. Also about EU programs as an associated partner, but also about the EU infrastructures that might be needful for Ukrainian researchers. And so we should take that also into account.
Thank you very much, very important. And now I turn to Adam. Please, Adam.
Thank you all for a fascinating conversation. I'll be here throughout the day fielding questions from our online audience. So if you are in our online audience, please do ask questions so that I can pass them on to our panelists. I'm Adam Levy, I'm a science journalist, and I think this is my 5th Falling Walls, so it's a great honor to be back. Now, firstly, to what extent do the lessons that we've been talking about here that we've learned from the context of Ukraine, to what extent could they apply in other contexts, in other countries which are also suffering the effects of war, or even in countries which are facing other unexpected disasters, for example, a sudden economic collapse?
Well, I turn to Julia from Blumenthal, because Julia, you mentioned that we should focus also research on Ukraine. This is a reaction to the current war and the current situation. So if we try to build a more resilient science and research system, how can we get prepared for, as Adam said, unforeseen developments in other parts of the world? Do we have to focus on regional studies in Eastern Asia, Central Europe, Eastern Europe? How can we be prepared in terms of regional studies and other fields of research?
Of course, regional studies extending to the whole world, to say it this way, is one important approach. But I would put it more generally. I think we should develop our science system in a way that it's not only focused on what we know is important today, but also sheds light on what we think is not as important is not as important today. So it's like always be prepared for the questions of tomorrow. It's a very general observation, but when you look back in time, I mean, after 9/11, the research on Arabic countries, on the Muslim world, was kind of renewed and extended. And then now we have the reaction, but this, of course, in a way, it didn't end because there's never a sharp end to something, but there is this wave of attention, and then this goes down after some time. And I'm a bit worried that we will witness the same with Ukraine, that we now have a wave of attention, and then it goes down after some time. And then I'm really worried, so what's the next region where then we get too late this wave of attention, which then again fades out. So it's a general warning to us all not to focus on what we see as the mainstream of questions we should focus on today. Very generally speaking, and for our funding lines is it's funding small disciplines. It's looking at fields that are maybe not as attractive for students at the moment. So looking at protecting also areas where not many students are present from too strong cuts. It's all what we can do.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, the floor is also open to you. If you want to ask questions, don't hesitate. Adam will tell you how you do this. Adam.
So we've spoken, of course, about how to support research in Ukraine and support Ukrainian researchers. What about research itself, which could potentially support Ukrainians, for example, by answering questions on the impact of war on people's mental health? What are the research questions that are most urgent to answer in today's context?
Who can answer this question? Liubov,
I'm not sure. I would like also still to add to the previous question. I think it's a bit related to your questions. I think they are slightly related. So I think when people talk about long-term sustainable strategies to science, they also should think about how to make science sustainable itself, how to make it global and open. And I really like these Lindau guidelines that were initiated by Elizabeth Blackburn, the Nobel laureate, during the Lindau meetings. that she spoke about sustainable, global, and open science. And there is the whole list, the whole guidelines how to reach it. It includes adopting the ethical code, responsibility, global cooperation on global issues, communicating to society, supporting talents worldwide. So I think all of that together, if you look at that, that could help us largely to solve some global issues that they were before, they will still happen. But until we satisfy each step there, I think global issues cannot be solved. But how to ensure that we can really globally cooperate on global issues as the whole world community, it's a hard question. I don't know how this can be solved, but these guidelines, they are there. Everyone can look at them, and I think that perhaps creating some guidelines for the whole community would be something what is very important. But the initiatives, some initiatives, they were and they are already there. So, yeah, just the matter of, again, cooperation, perhaps.
Thank you very much. Paweł and Julia.
I can just add that we are at the moment at many crisis situations. So, of course, it's COVID, what we all felt very much. We are in a crisis of climate, and the Ukrainian crisis is yet another working on a bit different time scale. So I think we can learn a lot. It's awful what I say, because it's kind of a lesson which is very costly to all of us, and particularly to Ukrainians. But it is kind of a crisis that we need to deal with, and I think it is a very important point for research as well. So crisis management on a short scale, that we can learn a lot. But I think we should take lessons for other crisis situations as well. So for example, although it seems not to be related to each other, but for example, climate change and this Ukrainian crisis, we can learn a lot from each other. So that's something that definitely can be and should be taken into account in our research programs at the moment.
I think what we really need is always the diversity of perspectives. Because, I mean, we had scholars, we had especially scholars also in Poland who warned what was going to happen in Ukraine and what the plans of the Russian government were. What we here, we didn't listen because we were so much focused on other interpretations. And I think to take into account different perspectives that you maybe don't like in the first place, this is one important learning from this crisis. And this is also, as you said, true for climate change. I mean, we hear now that at the global conference, for the first time, the question of compensating the countries who are most affected, having it at least on the agenda. So it's the first time to have it on the agenda, what doesn't mean that anything is coming out of that. I mean, this is, after so many conferences, it's, in a way, it's a shaming that the situation is like that. And it's about the difference of perspective, to take into account the diversity of perspectives. It's maybe some positive points here, positive lessons from Germany, because what we see is that we need something like the Philipp Schwarz initiative, which is a general program for scholars under threat. It was designed in a special situation, but it was designed in a way that it's open for any crisis. And I think we have to realize that we need this program permanently. And maybe we also have to spend more money on it, because the only thing we know is that we will have more crisis, more threat to science. We don't know where the worst situation will happen next, but we know that there's going to be more threat to science. And the second learning is we also need something similar for students, because the Hilde Domin initiative is also a good idea, but it's so small. And it's just too small for the many young, courageous young people we would like to welcome, and also whom we would like to give a chance to continue their education. And I think this is the third learning. It's that we always realize it's not only about shelter and providing a safe haven. It's about providing the opportunity to continue study, the education biography, and it's about continuing research.
Thank you very much. Adam, please.
The unfortunate second part of my job is to keep us running on time, and so unfortunately that's all the questions we have time for from the audience, but I'd like to hand back over to you for the last minute and a half to wrap up.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. And I would like to end on this positive note. We've discussed the tragic, the deplorable, the very challenging situations, and to that extent I thank Oleksiy and Liubov for your input and also for answering more or less personal questions. You should know that our hearts are with you and with your colleagues in Ukraine. But ladies and gentlemen, you also heard that there are many opportunities to help and to support. So please do not hesitate during the remaining hours of today and tomorrow to talk to the colleagues. There are initiatives that need funding. Please help and join the efforts to convince others to give or give yourself. And then there are opportunities on a more systemic level, and we heard it from Germany, from Heide and from Julia, and we should indeed try to coordinate activities in a manner which is meaningful, and as we learned, initiatives that work together with Ukraine, not about Ukraine, but with Ukraine, with Ukrainian colleagues, in order to find adequate ways how to support those who are in the country or who had to flee and live abroad. And last but not least, we learned today that we need a science and research system that is prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. So enough food for debate, enough food for discussions. I thank you all for being here, and I thank the colleagues around this table for this short hour of exchange and debate. Thank you very much.